I love anime. Shocking, I know. So much so that recently it's actually kind of become my career. But as I faced the challenge of explaining what I do to family and friends, I realized just how unapproachable anime is. It feels like when I'm talking to people, despite having watched a handful of anime, they won't define themselves as an anime viewer. I think there's lots of reasons for this, but some come to mind first. A lot like gaming, hardcore fans have been incredibly possessive of anime. Overt and constant heavy-handed fan service is pretty jarring. Even something as simple as reading subtitles may prevent people from watching anime. But I think they're missing out. Anime is filled with some of the most amazing, emotionally resonant stories I've ever had the opportunity to experience. But I find myself not being able to share this thing I'm so passionate about with many different people in my life. I wish it were more approachable. But what if there's a show that's so good it's easy to get into, where the hurdles of anime don't seem so big? One so well done and universal, you could even watch it with your mom. Welcome to a weekly running series called Exploring Frieren. My name is Pei, and today we're talking about the subtle things that make Frieren Beyond Journey's End more than just another anime. Today's video is brought to you by me. Turns out anime video essays are not as profitable as you'd imagine. Someday soon I'll replace this with actual sponsorships that will create a significantly more reliable source of income. But in the meantime, consider going to my Patreon. If you like this series, have disposable income, and want to support me, even if it's temporarily, there's a link in the description below. Let's start with a question. Why has Frieren stayed at the top of my anime list when so many other shows have failed to dethrone Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood? I actually made an entire video exploring that idea, but to oversimplify for today, I think Frieren offers so much depth and is incredibly approachable. The story is built around a simple, deep exploration of the human condition, which can apply to almost anyone. I think there are certain shows that people might define as starter anime that are more approachable for those who are less familiar with the medium. But out of all of those potential shows, I think this one specifically is the most approachable if you wanted to sit down and watch something with your mom. Now, before I explain why, there's a couple things I want to talk about first, so bear with me. People have this very reasonable misconception that Frieren is my all-time favorite show. I wonder where they got that idea. While I do love this show, the reason it's the entire identity of this channel is because it is a catalyst for talking about so many different interesting ideas. It's so well written, and there's lessons for people of all different walks of life to learn from it. Just over a month ago, I flew across the country because my brother and his partner were having their first baby. And as I was staying with my mom and working from my old bedroom, I had a viewer leave a really cool comment about how they watched Frieren with their mom. And as someone who had spent a lot of time explaining Frieren to my mom, I thought about what made it so approachable. What differentiated it from a lot of other anime that I would never even consider showing her? And thanks to this comment, I'm now making a video about it. And I think we'll start first with how Frieren subverted the anime trio, and it seems like people didn't even notice. I'm gonna name a couple shows, you tell me what they have in common. Naruto, Attack on Titan, Jujutsu Kaisen, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, Gurren Lagann, and Avatar: The Last Airbender. Each show has a trio made up of 2 male and 1 female characters. The protagonist is always male, sometimes the other male character is also a second protagonist, and the female character tends to be a supporting one. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with having a trio with this dynamic, but given anime's tendency towards poorly written female characters, I think there's been a huge drought. I think anime would benefit immensely from more well-done female protagonists. A couple of my favorite shows recently, like Bocchi the Rock and Skip and Loafer, have great female leads, which pulls us to the first reason why Frieren Beyond Journey's End is a great show to watch with your mom. It has not 1, but 2 outstanding female protagonists. I definitely believe Fern, especially as the story goes on, is as much of a main character as Frieren. This dynamic duo is rounded out by one of my favorite supporting characters written in the last couple years. Not only is the subversion of the anime trio really well done, it's also subtle. So what makes these female protagonists so well written? Anime generally has 2 approaches to female protagonists. They tend to be limited to genre like magical girls or slice of life, or they're a very specific archetype, sexy and badass. There are a couple great examples of this that I'm not personally very familiar with, but people hold in high regard. Shows like Ghost in a Shell, Black Lagoon, and Claymore all come to mind. Now, while Frieren definitely has her badass moments, I would say that it's not one of the initial character traits that come to mind first when thinking about her writing. She's so many different interesting things before badass. Now, different doesn't necessarily mean better, you just have more flexibility when people aren't as sensitive to common trope and cliche. So what actually makes these characters so good? Frieren is a unique and interesting character driven by fantastic duality. Paraphrasing a comment I once saw in a discussion thread, she's a great example of the difference between a long life and a long youth. Her feeling cold and disconnected from the people around her is a core aspect of the entire story, but she's far from dull, expressing tons of charm and personality. At times, she offers significant wisdom and understanding, and in other moments, she needs to be taken care of. And more important than any of these specific characteristic traits on paper, she's very cohesive. Everything works well to serve not only her character arc, but the overarching story. And her relationship with Fern, our second protagonist, is also outstanding. Their journeys are filled with clever little banter. There are clear parallels in their story arcs, while their individual personalities are very distinct. Both characters feel like fantastic explorations of optimistic nihilism. You can see this really explored throughout the entire series, but especially in the second episode titled "It Didn't Have to Be Magic." Fern is a really fun exploration of a teenage girl growing up in a fantasy world that doesn't feel like it relies too much on trope and cliche. I would say a lot of characters and even the story itself, especially initially, comes across as very dull. But as the story goes on, you learn a lot about how much they actually have to offer, especially when it comes to the relationships they have with one another. The pacing in the story is slow, but the deep emotional resonance that comes in both small and big moments throughout the show is only possible because of the pacing. The writers don't succeed despite slow pacing, but because they properly utilize the space it provides. But back to a final point about Frieren and Fern, they're both female characters that aren't at all defined by their gender, but their gender is absolutely factored into inspired character writing. To me, it felt like the writer really eloquently struck the balance between acknowledging that the characters are women and that's a big part of who they are, while also avoiding tokenization and writing compelling characters independent of their gender. There are love stories in this show that don't dominate it. They're built off of real chemistry and time spent together, all while being incredibly subtle, baked into the story alongside other significant plot points. It's rare to see love in stories like this take a back seat, but it's done so well in this series, which leads to the second reason your mom might love this show: the diversity it offers. There are old characters directly facing their own mortality. There are teenagers moving towards adulthood. There are really old characters that are also very youthful, and there are youthful characters that are forced to grow up quick. But there's also an extreme emotional diversity. It's not just the well-written ensemble cast. It's a story that at times is mundane, and then in other moments grandiose and big. But all of these unique components are built off of a very approachable foundation of a high fantasy world. People are used to these magical settings. They're familiar with elves, dwarves, dragons, and magic. Frieren's overlap with media like Lord of the Rings makes it more approachable, especially for generations of people that aren't familiar with anime. Which is funny because I'm personally a huge critic of fantasy. I find it incredibly overused and saturated. This series has actually kind of changed my mind because Frieren is so subversive as well, exploring ideas that I feel like somehow have never been explored before this. So all these different components, the fact that it's a story based off of the human condition, it has an outstanding ensemble cast that explores characters from all different age ranges, or that it's set in an approachable fantasy world. All these things contribute to you being able to share this experience with someone else, even maybe your mom. I think there are 3 major reasons I chose to make video essays on YouTube, all of which are important for different reasons. To be very blunt, the first is that I want to make money doing this. I'd like to have a stable career doing something I enjoy. The second is that I love analyzing media. To put to words a unique experience that I can't quite explain initially is really fun. Understanding all the different tactics and components that go into making an audience feel such strong emotions is really fun for me. But ultimately, the third and I think biggest reason I chose to make video essays is because I love consuming media as a way of connecting with others. So often, after finishing a fantastic piece of media, I immediately find myself going out of my way to go on forums. I find discussion threads of people talking about their experience. I grew up in a family that consumed media together. Some of my favorite experiences with all of my loved ones came that way. And the reason I actually ended up watching Frieren is because my roommate insisted. I had seen the first episode, and for some reason it had fallen in the back burner. I wasn't inspired to keep watching, but he pushed for us to watch it together. So across a month, we sat down and watched 3 episodes every couple nights. Obviously, that snowballed into me making this entire series, but I really value that experience. It's something I hold so dear. To be able to spend quality time consuming something that causes such a strong emotional response with other people is, I don't know, probably a major component of why I even watch media in the first place. Which is why I think Frieren is such a fantastic show. I had the luxury of consuming this alongside someone, and I'm hoping that my series offers some people that too. So thanks for exploring all these weird things with me. It's pretty cool. And if any of you do actually try watching this series with your mom, let me know how it goes. I'll see you next week.